Welcome to Quail's Knitting Nest. Here we are about a week later, and we're still under stay-at-home order from the governor. So we're sitting around and doing lots of knitting. Maybe you are too, or what else are you up to? Today I'll start with what I'm wearing. This is called Zweig, and it's by Caitlin Hunter. This is a great pattern, very easy to follow. I enjoyed knitting it. The lace wasn't too hard. I did do some modifications, as I usually do. In this case, I talked before about my rogue gauge usually being off, and in this case it was as well, but not too bad. What I ended up doing was this stripy portion right here, I shortened it. I think I did it maybe half or 2/3 as long as it should have been, because it was getting too long and I wanted to divide for the sleeves before. And I think I divided the sleeves like right after. If it had gone any longer, it would have been too long. Also, I added waist shaping and some short rows in the back to add a little length in the back. Oh, and a major modification I did was putting these triangles along the bottom and on the sleeves. The original pattern didn't have anything, it was just solid all down the whole bottom. The most interesting thing for me for this pattern was the way the sleeves were done. Normally, with a sleeve, you have a tapering going down on from the top of the sleeve down to the cuff. But in this case, you picked up the sleeve from the yoke and you just worked it straight. There was no decreases at all. And then when you got to the ribbing, I think there were some decreases there. And then you just worked the whole thing, the cuff, an extra long cuff in ribbing to bring it down so that it looks tapered even though it's not. It's interesting. Very easy to do. And that way you could work on a circular needle all the way down to here before you had to switch to small circumference knitting. So that was fun. It's nice. I did this in October of 2018, so about a year and a half ago. I'm trying to remember if it was my first Caitlin Hunter. I think it might have been my first pattern by her. I've since done a couple others. Next, I wanted to share with you level 2 of the Master's Hand Knitting course that I took. Wait till you see this binder. It's huge. So, as before, well, it starts off with a whole bunch of questions, kind of like classroom stuff, right? You have to learn, and then they ask you questions, and you have to answer them. So, for example, why would you want to join a seam from the right side as opposed to the wrong side? Or how and when would you use a 3-needle bind off, or why? Stuff like that. And then you explain. Then there's more swatches. In this case, there were a lot of seaming swatches. So stockinette stitch, garter stitch, siege stitch. How do you seam things together in any kind of stitch? Lots of seaming. Then there was more increases and decreases. In this case, they were paired. So they were coming, you know, either this way or this way. Lots and more increases and decreases. And then they had you do some lace swatches. And for these, you could pick your own, but you had to say, you had to write out what the pattern was that you used and where you got it from. So a couple of lace swatches here. Oh, here's one that's a pretty one. I'll pull it out and show it to you. try and get it open. I like that one. And then some cables, same thing. I got to pick out whatever cable I wanted, and then I had to write out the pattern for how to make the swatch, and then I knitted it. A couple of those. Here's one where I had to redo the swatch, and it's kind of obvious here why I had to redo it. So the first one looks like this, and the second one looks like this. So what happens when you knit cables is that your swatch will flare at the top and the bottom of the cable. And the idea is to compensate for that so that you don't get any flaring. So on the second swatch, you can see it's pretty straight. Whoops. Pretty straight across the top and the bottom. So you have to explain how you did it. There's a couple of different ways that you can compensate for cable flare. One is you can decrease or increase the number of stitches you're using. Here, this pink is easier to see, I think. So you'd start with fewer stitches at the bottom, and then when you get to the cable, you would increase right before the cable, because the cable sucks in more stitches. And then when you get to the top, you would decrease again. Another option, if you don't want to do that, is you can change your needle size. Although that also affects all the surrounding fabric as well, so that might not always be the best option. So that was one that I had to redo. Buttonholes, I did 3 different buttonholes. Little bit of stranded knitting. It's like an intro to stranded knitting. I think it's probably the very first one I ever tried. A pocket. Had to knit a pocket. Then I had to do 2 book reviews. So the first book I did a review of was The Complete Book of Traditional Scandinavian Knitting. I was kind of limited by what books were available in the library at the time, but that was a fun book to read anyway. And I did a review on the book Knitting in Plain English by Maggie Rigetti, and a review of the book Knitting Without Tears by Elizabeth Zimmerman. Those were my book reviews. Oh wait, there's one more. Vogue Knitting, the big Bible that everyone has. The project for this class was to knit a vest. You could pick any pattern that you wanted. You had to knit it. And, well, here, can you see? There we go. Knit it, send the vest in along with a picture of you wearing it to prove that it fits you, I guess. So this is me back when my hair was still gray. It wasn't completely white yet. So I don't wear vests. This is the only vest I've ever knitted, and I don't think I ever wore it once. I just made it for the class and got rid of it. And then at the back is my references and bibliography. Oh, and it looks like I wrote an essay called A Short History of Knitting Throughout the World. Yeah, I think we had to do an essay on the history of knitting, which at that time, looking in the library, there was not a lot of information, and most of what I wrote came from one source. So that was level 2. And here's my certificate. Now, at this time, I would normally show you what I'm working on. However, I finished up working on the Arne and Carlos Mystery Quarantine Knit-Along. I ran out of, I was using the blue and the green, and then I was using white as a contrast color, and I ran out of the white. So I ended up making 12 squares, and 5, 10, 15, I think there were 18 altogether. So there were 6 squares that I didn't make. No, I made 14 squares. And I used 12 of them to make this pillow. So here we go. This is the love side. And this is the hug me later side. I used mattress stitch to seam the sides together, and then I used 3 needle bind off to seam the bottom and top edges together. And then I also used the 3 needle bind off to seam all the way around the edge of the pillow. I'm joining my pillow together with a modified 3 needle bind off. I'm going to show you how I do that. So I have my stitches picked up on either side like a normal 3 needle bind off. Okay. And it starts off normally, so I'm going to put my needle in the first stitch, and here's where it changes. So now it's terribly out of focus. Okay, so now I'm going to go behind the needle and I'm going to purl the back stitch. Pull it off. Take my yarn to the back, and then I'm going to pull that through the front stitch and then bind it off. Okay, so let me show you that one more time. So I'm going to go in knitwise through the front stitch. Then I'm going to bring my yarn around to purl, and I'm going to purl the back stitch. Purl the back stitch. Bring my yarn to the back and pull that through the front stitch and then bind that off. Okay. And then you can see what I get is this nice chain along the edge. What I don't get is when you do a normal 3 needle bind off, you get a purl bump along the edges here, and you don't really get that with this. So I've done it all the way around my pillow. It's easy to see on this side where I'm joining the bottom to the top. But on the edges, where I'm joining side to side, this blends right in. You can't even see it. But it's green, and it's this column right here, because it looks like a regular chain stitch, which blends right in with the stockinette fabric. I didn't put buttons or anything on it. I just seamed the whole thing up. Fortunately, I had a pillow the right size to fit in here. Otherwise, I would have had to order one. But I'm really happy with how it turned out. It's soft and comfy, and it looks great. So until next time, take care, stay safe, stay at home. Bye-bye.